The wind screamed past Beatrice Morgan's ears as she crouched by the train car door, her fingers white-knuckled on the metal handle, knowing that what came next would either save her life or end it. Through the gap in the door, the Colorado landscape rushed by in a blur of red rock and scrub brush, the train rattling along at a speed that made her stomach clench with terror. But the bruise blooming purple across her cheekbone, and the memory of Victor Thornton's fist slamming into the wall beside her head just hours ago made the choice simple. She yanked the door open wider, the September wind of 1884 tearing at her traveling dress, and with a prayer on her lips and Victor's angry shouts behind her, she jumped. The ground came up faster than she expected, her body slamming into the hard earth with a force that knocked every bit of air from her lungs. She tumbled down an embankment, rocks and thorny bushes tearing at her skin and clothes, her head cracking against something solid that sent stars exploding across her vision. When she finally stopped rolling, she lay there in a broken heap, tasting blood and dirt, her ribs screaming in protest with every shallow breath she managed to take. Above her, the train's whistle blew long and mournful as it continued on toward Denver, carrying Victor away from her, at least for now. Beatrice tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her left ankle, sharp and hot, and her right shoulder felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it. Blood trickled down her temple from a gash somewhere in her hairline, and when she lifted her hand to touch it, her fingers came away red and sticky. She was alone in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town she knew, injured and helpless, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bag that had miraculously remained clutched in her good hand throughout the fall. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Beatrice knew she needed to find shelter, water, help, but her body refused to cooperate. She managed to drag herself a few feet closer to a scraggly juniper tree that offered minimal shade, then collapsed again, her vision swimming. How had her life come to this? 6 months ago, she had been a respectable schoolteacher in St. Louis, engaged to Victor Thornton, a railroad executive who seemed charming and attentive. Her parents had been so proud, so relieved that their 22-year-old daughter had finally found a suitable match. The mask had slipped slowly at first. A sharp word here, a tight grip on her arm there, always followed by profuse apologies and promises that it would never happen again. Then came the engagement party where he had cornered her in the hallway, his breath reeking of whiskey, his fingers digging into her wrists hard enough to leave marks when she suggested they wait until after the wedding for certain intimacies. Her mother had told her to be patient with him, that men had needs and expectations, that marriage would settle him. But when Victor had shown up at her boarding house 3 days ago insisting they leave immediately for Colorado, where a priest would marry them without all the fuss, something in his eyes had terrified her to her core. She had tried to refuse, and he had struck her for the first time, a backhanded slap that split her lip and made her ears ring. Before she could run or scream, he had forced her onto the train, keeping her in their private compartment with threats of what he would do if she made a scene. She must have passed out because when she opened her eyes again, the sun had moved considerably across the sky, and the shadows had grown longer. Her mouth was dry as cotton, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. Every part of her body hurt, but the throbbing in her ankle had become unbearable. She needed water desperately, but she could not see any signs of a stream or creek nearby, just endless scrubland stretching in all directions. That was when she heard it, the steady clip-clop of horse hooves on hard, packed earth. Beatrice tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely more than a croak. She swallowed painfully and tried again, managing a weak cry for help that sounded pathetically small against the vast emptiness of the Colorado wilderness. The hoofbeats stopped, and for a long moment there was only silence broken by the buzz of insects and the whisper of wind through the sparse vegetation. Then a man's voice called out, deep and cautious. "Hello, someone out here. Help," Beatrice managed, her voice breaking. "Please help me." The sound of boots on rock came closer, and then a figure appeared, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. As he moved into the shade near her, Beatrice could make out his features. A man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders beneath a worn Stetson. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, leather chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a bandana tied around his neck. His face was angular and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of whiskey that widened in shock when he saw her condition. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, what happened to you?" "Train," Beatrice whispered. "I jumped from the train." His hands were gentle as he examined her injuries, his touch careful and competent. "Your ankle's busted, maybe your shoulder too. You've got a nasty gash on your head and Lord knows what else is broken." He met her eyes and she saw genuine concern there, not a trace of the calculation or cruelty she had grown accustomed to seeing in Victor's gaze. "I'm going to take you back to my place. It is not fancy, but it is clean and safe. Can you tell me your name?" "Beatrice," she said. "Beatrice Morgan." "I am Xavier Ingram," he said. "I've got you now, Miss Morgan. You are going to be all right." He stood and walked back to where he had left his horse, a sturdy paint mare with kind eyes. When he returned, he crouched beside Beatrice again. "This is going to hurt something fierce, but we need to get you on my horse. I will try to be as gentle as I can." Beatrice nodded, bracing herself, but nothing could have prepared her for the agony that ripped through her body as Xavier carefully lifted her into his arms. She must have cried out because he paused, his expression pained. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, but we have got to get you somewhere I can treat these injuries proper." He carried her to his horse with surprising ease, and Beatrice realized that, beneath his shirt, he must be solid muscle from years of hard ranch work. He mounted first, then reached down and pulled her up in front of him with infinite care, settling her across his lap so that her injured shoulder could rest against his chest. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure, and despite her pain and fear and the strangeness of being held by a man she had just met, Beatrice felt safer than she had in months. "How far?" she asked through gritted teeth as the horse began to move. "About 5 miles to my ranch," Xavier said. "Try to stay awake if you can. Keep talking to me. Tell me how you ended up jumping off a train in the middle of nowhere." So as they rode through the lengthening shadows, Beatrice told him. She told him about Victor, about the engagement that had become a prison, about the increasingly frequent fits of rage and the threats. She told him about being forced onto the train and knowing with absolute certainty that if she stayed with Victor Thornton, he would eventually kill her. Xavier did not interrupt, did not question or doubt her story the way her mother had when she had tried to express her concerns. He just listened, his arm a steady presence around her waist, occasionally murmuring words of encouragement when her voice faltered. By the time they reached his ranch, twilight had painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Beatrice's head was swimming again, and she was not entirely sure what was real and what was fevered imagination. The ranch house appeared modest but well-maintained, a simple wooden structure with a wide porch and a barn set back behind it. Xavier dismounted and lifted her down carefully, then carried her up the porch steps and into the house. The interior was sparse but clean, with simple furniture and whitewashed walls. Xavier carried her through to a bedroom at the back of the house and laid her gently on a quilt-covered bed. "I am going to light some lamps and get water heating," he said. "Then I will need to clean and bandage your wounds. Have you ever had laudanum?" Beatrice shook her head weakly. "It will help with the pain," Xavier said. "I keep some on hand for emergencies. This definitely qualifies." He left the room, and Beatrice lay there staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. Just this morning, she had been Victor's prisoner on that train. Now she was lying in a strange man's bed, injured and helpless, completely dependent on his goodwill. But something about Xavier Ingram made her trust him in a way she had not trusted anyone in a very long time. Maybe it was the gentleness of his hands or the honest concern in his eyes. Maybe it was simply that she had no other choice. Xavier returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, bandages, and a small brown bottle. "This is going to be uncomfortable," he warned as he sat on the edge of the bed. "I need to check your injuries properly and clean them out. Some of these scrapes are full of dirt and rocks." He gave her a small dose of laudanum first, and Beatrice felt its effects within minutes, a warm, floating sensation that took the sharp edges off her pain. Xavier worked with steady competence, carefully removing her torn jacket and examining her shoulder. "Dislocated," he said. "I can put it back in place, but it is going to hurt like hell even with the laudanum. Are you ready?" Beatrice nodded, and Xavier positioned himself carefully. "On 3. 1, 2. He popped her shoulder back into its socket on 2, and Beatrice screamed, the pain cutting through the laudanum haze like a knife. But then it was done, and while her shoulder still ached terribly, the sharp grinding agony was gone. "I am sorry I lied about 3, Xavier said quietly. "But it is easier if you are not tensing up in anticipation." He cleaned the gash on her head next, his fingers gentle in her hair, then moved on to the countless scrapes and cuts covering her arms and legs. When he examined her ankle, his expression grew grave. "It is not just twisted. I think it might be broken. I can splint it for now, but you should see a doctor when you are able to travel. The nearest one is in Aurora, about 15 miles north of here." "Aurora," Beatrice repeated. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "Is that a big town?" "Big enough," Xavier said as he began wrapping her ankle with careful precision. "It is a mining town mostly, sprung up about 10 years ago when they found silver in the area. Got maybe 2,000 people now, a bank, a general store, a hotel, even a church and a schoolhouse. The doctor there, Doc Hartley, is a good man. He will fix you up proper once you are well enough to make the trip." "I cannot pay him," Beatrice said, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "I cannot pay you either. Everything I had, all my money, my papers, everything is still on that train with Victor." Xavier's hands paused in their work, and he looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "We will worry about payment later. Right now, you just need to heal. Are you hungry? Thirsty? You must be half dead from thirst after lying out there all afternoon." Now that he mentioned it, Beatrice realized she was desperately thirsty. Xavier brought her water, supporting her head while she drank, then insisted she try to eat some bread and cold beans left over from his own dinner. Her stomach rebelled at first, but once she got a few bites down, she discovered she was ravenous. When she had eaten all she could manage, Xavier helped her into a clean nightshirt, one of his own that hung huge on her smaller frame. He averted his eyes while she changed, holding the shirt around the doorframe for her to take, giving her what privacy he could despite her injuries making it nearly impossible for her to manage alone. His consideration touched her more than she could say. "You take the bed," Xavier said once she was settled back against the pillows. "I will bed down in the main room. This is your room," Beatrice protested weakly. "I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will," Xavier said firmly but kindly. "You are injured and need proper rest. I have slept in far less comfortable places than my own sofa, I promise you that." He paused at the doorway. "If you need anything during the night, anything at all, you just holler. I am a light sleeper." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Beatrice lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. The distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the creak of the house settling. She thought about Victor and whether he had realized yet that she had jumped from the train. Would he come looking for her? Would he go to the law and claim she was his runaway fiancé? The thought terrified her, but exhaustion and pain and the lingering effects of the laudanum pulled her under into restless sleep before she could worry further. She woke several times during the night, disoriented and frightened, crying out once from a nightmare where Victor had caught her and was dragging her back onto the train. Almost immediately, she heard Xavier's footsteps, and then he was there, lighting a lamp and sitting on the edge of the bed, not touching her but just being present. "You are safe," he said quietly. "You are at my ranch and no one is going to hurt you here. I promise you that." His calm certainty soothed her, and Beatrice found herself drifting back to sleep with the image of his steady amber eyes watching over her. Morning brought sunlight streaming through the window, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Beatrice's body was a symphony of pain, every muscle screaming in protest when she tried to sit up. She managed to lever herself upright eventually, her splinted ankle propped on a pillow, and was attempting to figure out how she might make it to the necessary when Xavier knocked on the door. "Come in," she called, trying to smooth her tangled hair with her good hand. Xavier entered carrying a tray with coffee, bacon, eggs, and biscuits. He set it on the bedside table and took in her struggling attempts to make herself presentable with a sympathetic look. "I brought you some breakfast. And I figure you probably need to use the outhouse, but that is going to be tricky with your ankle. I can help you out there if you are comfortable with that, or I can bring you a chamber pot if you would prefer more privacy." Beatrice felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She was not accustomed to discussing such intimate matters with anyone, let alone a man she had just met, but practicality won out over modesty. "The chamber pot, please," she said quietly. Xavier nodded without any trace of awkwardness or impropriety. "I will leave it just inside the door here. Take your time. The breakfast will keep warm." Over the following days, a routine developed. Xavier would rise before dawn to tend to his cattle and horses, leaving Beatrice breakfast and fresh water before he left. He would return mid-morning to check on her, change her bandages, and bring her lunch. Then he would head back out to finish his work, returning again in the evening to make dinner for both of them. He was an adequate cook, nothing fancy, but everything was hot and filling, and Beatrice found herself looking forward to those evening meals when Xavier would sit in the chair he had pulled up beside the bed, and they would talk. She learned that Xavier was 26 years old, that he had inherited this ranch from his uncle 2 years ago when the older man died of pneumonia. He had been working as a ranch hand on various spreads across Colorado since he was 16, saving every penny, and the inheritance had been his chance to finally have land of his own. He ran about 100 head of cattle and bred horses on the side, doing all the work himself because he could not afford to hire help yet. "It is a hard life," Xavier admitted one evening as they shared a dinner of stew and cornbread. "Some days I wonder if I am crazy for trying to make a go of it alone. But it is mine, you know. Every fence post I repair, every calf that survives the winter, every horse I train, it is building something that belongs to me. I never had that before." Beatrice understood that feeling more than he knew. "I wanted that too," she said. Independence. A life I had built myself. That is why I became a teacher instead of just waiting to get married like my mother wanted. I loved teaching those children, seeing their faces light up when they finally understood something they had been struggling with. It felt important, like I was doing something that mattered. What will you do now? Xavier asked. After you heal, I mean. It was a question Beatrice had been avoiding thinking about. I do not know, she admitted. I cannot go back to St. Louis. Victor will look for me there, and even if he does not, the scandal of a broken engagement will follow me everywhere. No one will hire a teacher with a ruined reputation. You could stay in Aurora, Xavier suggested carefully. From what I hear, their schoolteacher quit last month to get married and move to California. The town has been looking for a replacement, and it is far enough from St. Louis that maybe your past would not catch up with you. The idea took root in Beatrice's mind, fragile but hopeful. A fresh start in a town where no one knew her, where she could be just Beatrice Morgan, schoolteacher, not Beatrice Morgan, the woman who ran away from her fiancé. Do you think they would hire me? A woman alone with no references. Aurora is not as particular as some places, Xavier said. It is a rough town in a lot of ways, but people are generally more concerned with whether you can do the job than with your past. And if you needed someone to vouch for your character, I would be happy to do that. You barely know me, Beatrice pointed out, though his offer warmed her heart. Xavier met her eyes steadily. I know you were brave enough to jump off a moving train to escape a bad situation. I know you have been nothing but gracious and kind, despite being hurt and scared and completely dependent on a stranger. I know you light up when you talk about teaching children. That is enough for me. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had seen her so clearly, had valued her for who she actually was rather than what she represented or what she could provide? Thank you, she whispered, for everything. For saving me, for taking care of me, for seeing me as more than just a burden or a scandal. You are not a burden, Xavier said firmly. You are a woman who deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, and I am glad I found you when I did. As the days passed into weeks, Beatrice grew stronger. The gash on her head healed into a thin pink scar hidden by her hairline. The scrapes and bruises faded from purple to yellow to nothing. Her shoulder improved enough that she could move it with only mild discomfort, though Xavier warned her to be careful with it for several more weeks. Her ankle was the slowest to heal, still swollen and painful, but Xavier fashioned her a crutch from a sturdy branch, and she was able to get around the house on her own. She insisted on helping with what she could, mending Xavier's clothes with needle and thread from an old sewing kit she found in a drawer, preparing vegetables for dinner, tidying the house. Xavier protested at first, saying she should rest, but Beatrice needed to feel useful, needed to contribute something after all he had done for her. They fell into an easy companionship that felt both comfortable and charged with an undercurrent of something more. Beatrice found herself watching Xavier when he was not looking, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he carried wood for the stove, the way the evening light caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face into something boyish and sweet. She told herself she was being foolish, that gratitude was making her confuse her feelings, but her heart insisted otherwise. Xavier seemed to feel it too. She would catch him looking at her sometimes with an expression of such longing it made her breath catch. But he never acted on it, never crossed the line of propriety, always the perfect gentleman. Beatrice did not know whether to be grateful or frustrated by his restraint. One evening about 3 weeks after Xavier had found her, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Beatrice's ankle was propped on a stool, and Xavier sat in the chair beside her, whittling a piece of wood into what looked like it might become a horse. "I think you should go into Aurora tomorrow," Beatrice said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Inquire about the teaching position. I am well enough now that I can manage alone for a day, and we should find out if it is still available before I get my hopes up too much." Xavier's knife paused in its carving. "Are you sure? I hate to leave you here alone, especially if—" He did not finish the sentence, but Beatrice knew what he was thinking. "Especially if Victor comes looking for you. He would have come by now if he knew where I was," Beatrice said with more confidence than she felt. "And honestly, staying here forever is not realistic. I need to start rebuilding my life, and that means finding work and a place to live." The thought of leaving this ranch, of leaving Xavier, made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with her injuries. But she could not stay here indefinitely, living in his house, dependent on his charity. It was not proper, and more than that, it was not fair to him. He had already given up so much for her, his time and his resources. She would not take advantage of his kindness any further. "All right," Xavier agreed reluctantly. "I will ride into Aurora tomorrow and see what I can find out about the teaching job. But if you need anything at all, you stay put and wait for me to get back. Promise me you will not try to do anything foolish like hauling water or carrying wood." "I promise," Beatrice said, fighting the urge to reach over and take his hand. "I will be perfectly fine for one day." Xavier left early the next morning after making sure Beatrice had everything she might need within easy reach. The house felt enormous and empty without him, and Beatrice found herself wandering from room to room, restless despite her still healing ankle. She ended up in Xavier's bedroom, the room she had been occupying since her arrival. She had offered multiple times to take the sofa so he could have his own bed back, but he had always refused, saying she needed the proper rest more than he did. Looking around the room with fresh eyes, Beatrice noticed details she had been too injured or too focused on her own misery to see before. A photograph on the dresser showed a young Xavier with an older man who must have been his uncle, both of them standing in front of this very house. A pair of worn leather gloves lay draped over the bedpost. A book sat on the nightstand, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman, the spine cracked from repeated readings. The discovery of the poetry book touched her deeply. She had assumed Xavier was just a simple rancher, someone practical and straightforward, but the idea that he read poetry in his spare time added layers to him she found endlessly fascinating. She picked up the book, noting the passages he had marked with strips of leather, and read them, trying to see the words through his eyes. She was so absorbed in the book that she did not hear the horse approach, did not realize anyone was there until a shadow fell across the porch and a voice she had hoped never to hear again called out, "Beatrice, I know you are in there." Her blood turned to ice. Victor had found her. Beatrice's first instinct was to hide, to crawl under the bed or into a closet like a frightened child. But she was not that person anymore. She had jumped off a moving train to escape this man. She had survived broken bones and days of pain and fear. She would not cower from him now. Using her crutch, she made her way slowly to the front door. Through the window, she could see Victor on a rented horse, looking travel-stained and furious. His handsome face was twisted with anger, and even from here she could see the dangerous glint in his eyes that she had come to know so well. She opened the door but stayed inside the threshold, the heavy wooden door a barrier between them. "How did you find me?" "It was not easy," Victor said, dismounting and taking a step toward the porch. "I had to search every town along the rail line, asking if anyone had seen a woman matching your description. Cost me a small fortune in bribes and rewards. but I finally found a ranch hand who remembered seeing a cowboy riding past with an injured woman. He pointed me in this direction." He smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "Did you really think you could run from me, Beatrice? Did you think I would just let you go?" "I am not going back with you," Beatrice said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "The engagement is over, Victor. I do not want to marry you." "What you want is irrelevant," Victor said, his voice dropping to the cold, controlled tone that scared her more than his shouting. "You are mine, Beatrice. I have invested time and money in you and our future together. You do not get to just walk away because you have got some foolish notions about independence." He took another step closer. "Now, you are going to pack whatever pathetic belongings you have acquired here, and you are going to come with me. We can still salvage this if we move quickly. I will tell people you had a nervous episode, that you needed some time to recover in the country. They will understand. Women are delicate creatures, prone to hysteria." Rage flooded through Beatrice, burning away her fear. "I am not hysterical, and I am not yours. You do not own me, Victor. You never did." "The law would disagree with you," Victor said. "We are engaged to be married. You accepted my proposal in front of witnesses. Your father shook my hand on the deal. If you refuse to honor that agreement, I can sue your family for breach of contract. I can ruin your father's business reputation. Is that what you want? To destroy your family because you are too selfish to do your duty?" The threat hit home because Beatrice knew he was capable of following through on it. Her father was a clerk with a modest income, a man who relied on his reputation for honesty and reliability. A scandal like this could destroy him. But even as the guilt tried to sink its claws into her, Beatrice remembered the feel of Victor's fist connecting with her face, the terror of being trapped in that train compartment with him, the certainty that if she married him, she would end up dead or broken. "Do what you need to do," Beatrice said, "but I am not going with you." Victor's face flushed dark red, and he took the porch steps in 2 long strides. Beatrice tried to close the door, but he was too fast, his shoulder slamming into the wood and forcing it open. She stumbled backward, nearly falling, her crutch clattering to the floor. Victor grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. "You stubborn little," he raised his hand, and Beatrice knew he was going to hit her, was already bracing for the impact when a voice cut through the air like a whip crack. "Get your hands off her." Xavier stood in the doorway, and Beatrice had never been so relieved to see anyone in her entire life. He must have forgotten something and turned back, or maybe some instinct had told him to return. Whatever the reason, he was here now, and the look on his face made even Victor hesitate. "This is none of your business, Cowboy," Victor said, not releasing Beatrice's arm. "This is between me and my fiancé." "She is not your fiancé," Xavier said, his voice deadly calm. "She is a woman you hurt and terrorized. Now I am going to say this one more time. Get your hands off her." "Or what?" Victor challenged. "You will shoot me. Draw on an unarmed man. They will hang you for murder." Xavier's hand hovered near the revolver at his hip. "Maybe, but you will still be dead, and that is a trade I am willing to make if you do not let her go right now." Something in Xavier's eyes must have convinced Victor he was serious, because he released Beatrice's arm and took a step back, his hands raised in a mockery of surrender. "Fine. But this is not over, Beatrice. You think you can hide out here playing house with this nobody rancher, but you are wrong. I will make your life hell. I will sue your family into poverty. I will make sure every decent person in St. Louis knows what a whore you are, shacking up with the first man who showed you attention. You will have nothing and no one when I am through with you." "Get out," Xavier said. "Get off my property before I throw you off." Victor sneered at him. "You are making a mistake protecting her. She is not worth it. Damaged goods now anyway after living here with you unchaperoned. No decent man will want her." Xavier moved so fast Beatrice barely saw it. One moment he was standing by the door, the next he had Victor by the collar, half lifting him off the ground. "I said get out. Now. Or I swear to God I will beat you within an inch of your life and dump you on the road to Aurora." Victor must have seen something in Xavier's face that terrified him because he did not argue further. Xavier released him and all but threw him toward his horse. Victor mounted clumsily, his face pale now instead of red. "This is not over," he repeated, but the words lacked conviction. He turned his horse and rode away, kicking the poor animal into a gallop. Xavier watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned to Beatrice. She was shaking, she realized, her whole body trembling with reaction. Xavier crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her shoulder. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I am fine," Beatrice managed, though her voice was unsteady. "He grabbed my arm, but that is all. You came back just in time." "I got halfway to Aurora and realized I had forgotten the money I meant to bring for supplies," Xavier said. "Thank God for my forgetfulness." He pulled back to look at her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "He's going to keep coming after you, Beatrice. Men like that do not give up easily. We need to figure out a way to make you safe permanently." "How?" Beatrice asked helplessly. "He is right about one thing. I have no legal standing to refuse him. We are engaged, and in the eyes of the law, that means he has certain rights over me. If I try to take him to court, it will be his word against mine, and he has money and influence. I have nothing." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he said, "You could marry someone else. If you are married to another man, Victor would have no legal claim on you at all. The engagement would be automatically void." Beatrice's heart began to pound. "Who would marry me? I have no money, no family here, nothing to offer anyone." Xavier met her eyes steadily. "You could marry me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Beatrice searched his face, trying to understand what he was offering. A marriage of convenience to protect her from Victor, a business arrangement, or something more. "Xavier, I cannot ask you to do that," she said. "You would be saddling yourself with a wife you do not want, someone else's scandal, Victor's anger. It is too much." "What makes you think I do not want you?" Xavier asked quietly. Beatrice's breath caught. "What?" Xavier took her hand carefully, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I have not said anything because it seemed wrong to speak of such things when you were injured and dependent on me. I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated. But Beatrice, these past few weeks with you here have been the happiest I have been in years. I look forward to coming home every day knowing you will be here. I love listening to you talk about teaching, watching your face light up when you laugh at something I say. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. If you would consent to marry me, it would not be a sacrifice or a favor. It would be the greatest gift I could imagine." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks. "I thought I was imagining it, what I felt for you. I told myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or fear making me confused. But Xavier, I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you held me on your horse and promised me I was safe. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more. You are the kindest, most decent man I have ever met, and I cannot believe you would want someone as broken and scandalous as me." "You are not broken," Xavier said fiercely. "You are bent, maybe battered, but not broken. And I do want you, Beatrice. I want you to be my wife, to build a life with me here. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to watch you teach children in Aurora and come home to me at the end of each day. I want everything with you if you will have me." "Yes," Beatrice whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Beatrice melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, feeling like she had finally come home after years of being lost. They rode into Aurora together 2 days later, Beatrice sitting in front of Xavier on his horse, her ankle still too weak for her to ride alone. The town was bigger than she had expected, a bustling collection of buildings clustered around a main street that ran through the center like a spine. There was indeed a bank, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and various other establishments that spoke to a community that was growing and prospering. Their first stop was the church, a simple white building with a bell tower and a young minister named Reverend Thomas who looked surprised but pleased when Xavier explained they wanted to be married right away. "Do you have witnesses?" he asked. "You need at least 2 for the marriage to be legal." Xavier stepped outside and returned a few minutes later with 2 men he had apparently spotted on the street, both of whom agreed cheerfully to witness a wedding in exchange for $1 each. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory, nothing like the elaborate wedding Beatrice's mother had planned for her marriage to Victor, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Xavier slipped a simple gold band on her finger, one he had apparently purchased on his previous trip to town, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared made Beatrice's toes curl in her borrowed boots. They stopped at the general store next, where Xavier introduced Beatrice to the owner, a portly man named Mr. Henderson who seemed to know everyone in town. "My wife and I were married this morning," Xavier said, and Beatrice felt a thrill at hearing him call her his wife. "We are looking for information about the teaching position that is open." Mr. Henderson beamed at them. "Well, congratulations, and you are in luck. The school board has been desperate to find a replacement teacher before the term starts next week. The chairman is Judge Morrison. His office is above the bank. You should go speak with him right away." Judge Morrison turned out to be a stern-looking man in his 50s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes. He listened to Beatrice's carefully edited history, how she had been a teacher in St. Louis and had recently relocated to Colorado with her new husband and was looking for employment. She had her heart in her throat the entire time, sure he would see through her lies or demand references she could not provide. But the judge surprised her. "Can you read and write?" he asked bluntly. "Yes, sir. Very well." "Can you handle arithmetic, geography, history, all the basics?" "Yes, sir." "Can you manage a classroom of 30 children ranging in age from 6 to 14, many of whom would rather be anywhere else than sitting at a desk?" Beatrice smiled. "I have done it before, sir. I can do it again." Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Mrs. Ingram, I will be frank with you. Aurora is not a cultured city like St. Louis. Many of these children come from rough backgrounds. Their fathers are miners and cowboys and railroad workers, men who never had much schooling themselves and do not always see the value in it for their children. You will face challenges here that you might not have faced back east. But if you are willing to work hard and not give up when things get difficult, the job is yours. It pays $30 a month, and you can use the schoolhouse as your classroom Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. $30 a month was not much, but it was a start. Beatrice accepted immediately, shaking the judge's hand with her good arm and thanking him profusely. As they left his office, she felt lighter than she had in months. She had a job, a husband who loved her, and a new life stretching out before her full of possibility. They stopped at the hotel for lunch, a modest meal of roast chicken and vegetables that tasted like a feast to Beatrice. As they ate, Xavier said, "We should send a telegram to your parents. Let them know you are safe and married. They must be worried sick about you." Beatrice's stomach clenched. She had not thought about her parents in days, too wrapped up in her own survival and then in her growing feelings for Xavier. But of course they would be worried. Victor had probably told them some story about her running away, painted himself as the wronged party. What do I say? How do I explain? "The truth," Xavier said, "or as much of it as you are comfortable sharing. They deserve to know you are safe and happy." They went to the telegraph office after lunch, and Beatrice composed a carefully worded message. "Mother and father, I am safe and well. Married to good man named Xavier Ingram, living near Aurora, Colorado. Teaching school here. Please do not worry. Will write with more details soon. Love, Beatrice." Sending the telegram felt like closing a door on her old life. Whatever happened now, whatever Victor did or said, she was Beatrice Ingram now, not Beatrice Morgan. She had a husband and a home and a job. She was starting over, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Xavier bought supplies at the general store, including fabric so Beatrice could make herself new dresses since the one she had jumped from the train in was beyond repair. And they rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set. Beatrice leaned back against Xavier's chest, his arm secure around her waist, and felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. This feeling of safety and belonging, of being cherished by someone who saw her truly and loved her anyway. That night, their first as husband and wife, Xavier carried her over the threshold of the ranch house in the tradition, making her laugh. He set her down gently and then just looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. "Beatrice, I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you tonight. I know this all happened very fast and you have been through a terrible ordeal. We can take our time with the physical side of marriage. I will wait as long as you need." His consideration touched her deeply, but Beatrice realized she did not want to wait. She wanted to be Xavier's wife in every sense of the word, to replace the memories of Victor's violence with Xavier's tenderness. She stepped close to him, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "I do not want to wait," she said softly. "I want to be your wife completely. I want to belong to you and for you to belong to me. I trust you, Xavier. I love you." The kiss that followed was deeper than the one in the church, hungry and passionate. Xavier lifted her carefully into his arms and carried her to his bedroom, their bedroom now, laying her on the bed with infinite care. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his hands gentle on her healing injuries, his lips following the path of his fingers. Beatrice had been taught that the marriage bed was a duty women endured, but with Xavier, it was nothing like that. It was beautiful and intimate and occasionally awkward as they learned each other's bodies, but through it all was a current of love and trust that made every touch meaningful. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Xavier's arm around her, Beatrice's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you," Xavier murmured into her hair. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for finding me," Beatrice whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me as more than damaged or scandalous. Thank you for loving me." The weeks that followed were busy as Beatrice prepared to start teaching and settled into her new role as Xavier's wife and a rancher's helpmate. Her ankle healed slowly but steadily, and by the time school started in late September, she could walk with only a slight limp. Xavier had built her a desk and chair for the schoolhouse, had helped her organize the meager supplies the school board provided, had even helped her clean the dusty building from top to bottom until it shone. Her first day of teaching in Aurora was nerve-wracking. Judge Morrison had not been exaggerating about the challenges. Many of the children were rough around the edges, the boys especially prone to talking back or refusing to follow instructions. But Beatrice had dealt with difficult students before, and she quickly established that while she was kind, she was also firm. She made lessons as engaging as possible, using real-world examples that would matter to children growing up in a mining town, and slowly, the students began to respond. There was a little girl named Sarah, just 7 years old, whose mother had died the previous winter. She was painfully shy, often sitting in the back corner with her eyes downcast. Beatrice made a special effort with her, encouraging her gently, praising her when she did well, never pushing too hard. Gradually, Sarah began to open up, and by the end of the first month she was raising her hand to answer questions and even smiling occasionally. There was a boy named Thomas, 13 and angry at the world, who challenged Beatrice at every turn. He was bright, she could see that immediately, but he had convinced himself that school was a waste of time. Beatrice caught him reading a dime novel one day, and instead of confiscating it, she asked him about it. That led to a conversation about different types of literature, and before he knew it, she had him interested in reading more challenging books. She loaned him Xavier's copy of Walt Whitman, and Thomas devoured it, coming back with questions and insights that showed he was thinking deeply about what he had read. Every evening, Beatrice would come home to the ranch and tell Xavier about her day, about the triumphs and frustrations, and he would listen with genuine interest, offering advice when she asked for it, and simply being supportive when she just needed to vent. In turn, she learned about the rhythms of ranch life, began to understand the concerns that kept him up at night: the prices of cattle, the condition of his pastures, the endless repairs that needed to be made. She started helping more as her injuries fully healed, feeding chickens, tending a small vegetable garden, even learning to milk the cow Xavier kept for fresh dairy. It was hard work, physically demanding in ways teaching never had been, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. She was building a life with her hands, contributing to their shared home in tangible ways. About 6 weeks after their wedding, a letter arrived from Beatrice's parents. Her mother's handwriting was shaky, and the words were full of hurt and confusion. "How could you do this to us?" The letter began. "Victor told us everything, how you seduced some cowboy and ran off to live in sin with him. He says you jumped off the train like a lunatic, and he has been searching for you ever since, worried sick. Your father is devastated. His business partners want nothing to do with him now. The scandal has ruined us, Beatrice. I hope you are happy with your choices." Beatrice read the letter with tears streaming down her face. She had known this was coming, had known Victor would twist the truth to make himself look like the victim. But seeing her mother's words, feeling the weight of her parents' disappointment, was more painful than she had expected. Xavier found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter crumpled in her fist, sobbing. He read the letter over her shoulder, then pulled her into his arms. "I am so sorry," he murmured. "I am so sorry he is doing this to you, to your family. It is all lies," Beatrice choked out. "But they believe him. They think I am some kind of monster who destroyed everything for a cowboy I barely knew. They do not understand what he was doing to me, how scared I was." "Then tell them," Xavier said. "Write them back and tell them the truth, all of it. They may not believe you at first, but plant the seed of doubt. Maybe in time they will come to understand." So Beatrice wrote a long letter that night, pouring out everything she had been through. She told her parents about Victor's violence, about the bruises and threats, about being forced onto the train. She told them about jumping and being found by Xavier, about his kindness and respect. She told them she loved Xavier, that she had married him freely and happily, that she was teaching again and building a good life. She begged them to understand, to see through Victor's lies, to forgive her for the scandal even if it was not her fault. She did not know if the letter would make a difference, but she felt better for having sent it. The truth was out there now, and whatever her parents chose to believe was up to them. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm as autumn deepened into winter. Beatrice taught her students. Xavier worked his ranch, and in the evenings they came together in their small home and built a life full of quiet joy. They talked about everything and nothing, shared their hopes and dreams, made love with increasing passion and confidence as they learned what pleased each other. Just before Christmas, Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before she finally told Xavier. They were sitting by the fire one evening, Xavier mending a bridle and Beatrice grading papers, when she said, "I think I might be with child." Xavier's hand stilled on the leather. He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "Not completely," Beatrice admitted. "But all the signs are there. I would need to see a doctor to be certain." Xavier set aside the bridle and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. He put his hand on her still flat stomach, his expression awed. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, suddenly nervous. They had not discussed children, had not planned this, though of course it was a natural consequence of their marriage. "Happy," Xavier laughed, the sound full of wonder. "Beatrice, I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled. A child of ours, a little person who is part of both of us. It is more than I ever dared to hope for." They rode into Aurora the next week to see Doc Hartley, who confirmed what Beatrice had suspected. She was about 8 weeks along, which meant the baby would arrive in late June or early July. Doc Hartley, a kind older man with white whiskers, examined her thoroughly and declared her healthy despite her relatively recent injuries. "That ankle healed up nicely," he said. "And your shoulder seems to have full range of motion. You are a lucky young woman, Mrs. Ingram. That fall could have killed you or left you crippled." "I know," Beatrice said, glancing at Xavier. "I am very lucky indeed. Christmas that year was simple but joyful." They could not afford much, but Xavier surprised Beatrice with a beautiful shawl he had purchased from a seamstress in town. Soft wool dyed a rich blue that brought out her eyes. Beatrice gave him a new hat to replace his battered old Stetson and a book of poetry she had ordered from Denver. They spent the day together at the ranch, just the two of them, cooking a modest feast and talking about the future. "We need to think about adding a room to the house," Xavier said as they sat by the fire that evening. "We cannot raise a baby in that small bedroom. We will need space for a cradle and eventually a proper bed when the child gets older." "We cannot afford that right now," Beatrice pointed out. "The materials alone would cost more than we can spare." "Then I will trade labor for materials," Xavier said. "I can help some of the other ranchers with their work in exchange for lumber and nails. It will take time, but I can do it. Our child deserves a proper home." Beatrice felt her eyes fill with tears, which seemed to happen constantly these days. The pregnancy was making her emotional, quick to cry at the smallest kindness or frustration. "You are going to be such a wonderful father." "I hope so," Xavier said quietly. "I want to do right by you and by our child. I want to give you both a life full of love and security." "You already are," Beatrice assured him. "Just by being you, by loving us, you are giving us everything that matters." In January, a letter arrived from Beatrice's father. It was brief, his handwriting rigid and formal, but the content made Beatrice weep with relief. "I investigated the claims you made about Victor Thornton," the letter said. "I spoke to some of your friends and former colleagues. Miss Peterson remembered seeing bruises on your wrists and how frightened you seemed in the weeks before you left. Mr. Carver from the school board mentioned that Mr. Thornton had a reputation for a violent temper and had been asked to leave a gentleman's club after striking another man. I am ashamed to say I did not look more closely when I should have." I trusted his money and position instead of listening to my own daughter. Your mother and I are working to rebuild the damage the scandal caused. It has not been easy, but we are managing. We do not ask you to forgive us for not believing you initially. We only ask that you write to us occasionally so we know you are well. Your mother would like to meet your husband someday if you would permit it. The letter was not a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Beatrice wrote back immediately, telling them about the baby, about her teaching position, about Xavier and the ranch. Her mother's reply came a month later, full of cautious joy about becoming a grandmother and tentative warmth toward Xavier. The rift between them was not fully healed, might never be fully healed, but at least they were talking again, and that was something. Winter gave way to spring, and Beatrice's belly began to swell with their growing child. She continued teaching as long as she could, but by May, climbing the steps to the schoolhouse had become difficult, and she was so tired at the end of each day that she could barely stay awake through dinner. Judge Morrison suggested she take the last few weeks of the term off, and after discussing it with Xavier, Beatrice agreed. One of the mothers in town who had some education volunteered to finish out the year, and Beatrice spent the final weeks before the baby's arrival preparing their home. True to his word, Xavier had built an addition to the house, a second bedroom that was bright and airy with windows on two sides. He had made a cradle from smooth pine, had sanded it for hours until there was not a single rough edge that could harm delicate baby skin. Beatrice sewed blankets and tiny gowns, embroidered little animals on cloth diapers, and nested in a way that was both practical and deeply instinctual. The baby came on a hot July night, arriving after 12 hours of labor that left Beatrice exhausted and overwhelmed. Doc Hartley had come out to the ranch to attend the birth, along with a midwife named Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in Aurora. Xavier stayed by Beatrice's side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement when she was sure she could not go on. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, Beatrice felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Xavier cut the cord with shaking hands, and when Doc Hartley placed the baby in Beatrice's arms, Xavier sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently touching his son's downy head. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Beatrice, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Lucas, after Xavier's uncle who had left him the ranch. Lucas William Ingram, a name that felt strong and solid and right. He had Xavier's dark hair and Beatrice's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born, he owned both of their hearts completely. The first few months with Lucas were exhausting in ways Beatrice had not anticipated. He nursed constantly, rarely slept more than 2 hours at a stretch, and cried inconsolably for reasons she could not always decipher. But there were also moments of such pure joy that they eclipsed all the difficulty. Lucas's first smile, directed at Xavier as his father sang him a lullaby. The way he would grab Beatrice's finger and hold on tight, his tiny hand impossibly small in hers. The sound of Xavier walking him around the ranch at dawn, talking to him about the cattle and horses as if Lucas could understand every word. Beatrice did not return to teaching that fall. They could not afford childcare, and she could not imagine leaving Lucas with anyone else anyway. She missed her students, missed the intellectual stimulation of teaching, but she found that being a mother filled her in ways she had not expected. She was teaching Lucas, she realized, teaching him about the world every time she spoke to him, read to him, showed him something new. Money was tight with only Xavier's ranch income, but they made it work. They grew most of their own food, raised chickens for eggs and the occasional Sunday dinner, and were careful with every penny. It was not the life Beatrice had imagined for herself back in St. Louis, but it was a good life, full of love and purpose and the satisfaction of building something lasting. Lucas was just over a year old when Victor Thornton came back. Beatrice was in the garden with Lucas, letting him toddle around and explore while she weeded the vegetables, when she heard a horse approach. She looked up and felt her blood run cold. Victor sat astride a fine black horse, dressed in an expensive suit despite the dust of the trail. He looked older than she remembered, lines around his eyes and mouth that had not been there before, but his eyes had the same cold calculation she remembered too well. "Hello, Beatrice," he said, his voice pleasant as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "Or should I say Mrs. Ingram? I heard you had a child. Congratulations." Beatrice scooped Lucas up, holding him close. "What are you doing here, Victor? I told you our engagement was over." "I am married now. You have no claim on me." "I am not here to claim you," Victor said, dismounting smoothly. "I am here because I am getting married myself in a few weeks, and my fiancé insisted I make peace with you first. She is a very forgiving woman, full of Christian charity. She seems to think we can all be friends despite our unfortunate past." Beatrice did not believe him for a second. Victor was not capable of forgiveness or friendship. He was here for some other reason, something that would benefit him in some way. "I am happy for you," she said carefully, "but I cannot imagine what we would have to say to each other now." "I wanted to apologize," Victor said, and Beatrice almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "I was not at my best during our engagement. I had been drinking too much, under a great deal of stress at work. I handled things poorly. I frightened you, and for that I am truly sorry." The words were right, but the delivery was wrong. There was no real remorse in his voice, no genuine regret in his eyes. This was a performance for someone's benefit, probably this fiancé he had mentioned. Beatrice wondered what lies he had told her, what version of events made him look like the wounded party. "I accept your apology," Beatrice said, because it seemed the fastest way to get him to leave. "And I wish you well in your marriage, but I need to ask you to leave now. My husband will be home soon, and I do not think he would appreciate finding you here." "Of course," Victor said smoothly. "But before I go, I want you to know that I harbor no ill will toward you. What is past is past. I have no intention of causing trouble for you or your family going forward." It was a threat disguised as reassurance, and they both knew it. He was reminding her that he still had the power to hurt her parents, to spread rumors and lies if he chose. But he was also saying he would not do those things as long as she stayed out of his way, stayed silent about what he had done. "Goodbye, Victor," Beatrice said firmly, walking toward the house with Lucas on her hip. She did not look back, did not wait to see if he mounted his horse or what direction he rode off in. She just got herself and Lucas inside, locked the door and collapsed against it, her heart racing. When Xavier came home an hour later, she told him everything. His face darkened with anger, but he kept his voice calm for Lucas's sake. "He was threatening you, making sure you would not tell his new fiancé what he really is." "I know," Beatrice said, "but what can we do? It is his word against mine, and he has already proven he is more than willing to lie and manipulate. This poor woman he is marrying has no idea what she is getting into." "Do you know her name?" Xavier asked. Beatrice shook her head. "He did not say." "Maybe we can find out," Xavier said thoughtfully. "And maybe we can warn her, anonymously if necessary. She deserves to know what kind of man she is agreeing to marry." They discussed it long into the night, weighing the risks against their conscience. In the end, they decided to write a letter to Victor's fiancée. careful to include facts that could be verified, people she could talk to who knew about Victor's temper and violence. They did not sign it, but they included Beatrice's parents' address in St. Louis as someone who could corroborate the story. They never knew if the letter made a difference. They heard through the grapevine a few months later that Victor's engagement had been broken off, but they did not know if it was because of their letter or for some other reason. Beatrice chose to believe that they had saved one woman from the fate she herself had narrowly escaped, and that brought her peace. The years passed peacefully after that. Lucas grew from a toddler into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping his father on the ranch and listening to his mother read stories. When he was 3, Beatrice returned to teaching part-time, with Xavier watching Lucas on the days she worked. When Lucas was 5 and old enough to attend school himself, Beatrice went back full-time, and Lucas would sit in her classroom and learn alongside the other children. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Alina when Lucas was 4, and another son they named James when Alina was 2. The house grew more crowded and chaotic, but also more joyful. Xavier expanded the house again, adding a 3rd bedroom and enlarging the kitchen to accommodate their growing family. The ranch prospered as Xavier's reputation for breeding good horses spread. He was able to hire a hand to help with the heavy work, a young man named Peter who reminded Xavier of himself at that age, eager and hardworking and grateful for the opportunity. With the extra help, Xavier had time to teach Lucas about ranching, to take him out on rides to check the cattle, to show him how to mend fences and care for horses. Beatrice loved watching Xavier with their children. He was patient and kind, quick to praise and slow to anger, everything a father should be. He taught them to read before they started school, would spend hours answering their endless questions about why the sky was blue and where the stars went during the day. He treated Alina with the same respect he showed Lucas, never suggesting that her dreams should be smaller because she was a girl. Beatrice's parents came to visit when Lucas was 7, making the long journey from St. Louis to meet their grandchildren and finally see the life Beatrice had built. Her mother cried when she saw the ranch, though whether from joy or sadness at how different it was from the life she had imagined for her daughter, Beatrice could not say. But by the end of the visit, even her mother had to admit that Beatrice was happy, that Xavier was a good man, that the children were healthy and loved. "I am sorry," her mother said on their last night as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "for not believing you about Victor, for putting his reputation above your safety. I will regret that for the rest of my life." "I forgive you," Beatrice said, and she meant it. Time and distance, and the healing power of her own happiness had softened her anger into something more like sadness for what they had all lost. "You did what you thought was right with the information you had. I cannot ask for more than that." When Beatrice was 30, the school board approached her about becoming the principal of the school. The current principal was retiring, and they wanted someone who understood Aurora, who had been part of the community for years. It was more responsibility but also more money, and after discussing it with Xavier, Beatrice accepted. She continued teaching her own class while also overseeing the other teachers, managing the school budget, and advocating for more resources and better facilities. Under her leadership, the school flourished. They added a small library, expanded the curriculum to include more science and literature, and started a program where older students could mentor younger ones. Beatrice's reputation as an educator grew, and parents who had been skeptical of sending their children to school began to see the value in education. Lucas grew into a young man who looked so much like Xavier it made Beatrice's heart ache, but he had her love of learning and books. He wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by the animals on the ranch, and determined to help them when they were sick or injured. Xavier supported his dream wholeheartedly, saving money so that Lucas could attend veterinary school back east when he was old enough. Alina was fierce and independent, determined to prove she could do anything her brothers could do. She rode better than most of the ranch hands, could rope a calf with precision, and had a sharp business mind that Xavier said would make her an excellent ranch manager someday. James was quiet and thoughtful, more interested in drawing and music than in ranching or teaching, and Xavier bought him a used guitar when he was 10 so he could pursue that passion. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Beatrice with a trip to Denver. They left the children with her parents, who had moved to Colorado to be closer to their grandchildren, and spent 3 days in the city like newlyweds. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in restaurants, went to the theater, and spent long hours in their room making love and talking and remembering the people they had been when they first met. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked one night as they lay tangled in expensive hotel sheets. "Jumping off that train, everything you gave up to be here with me." Beatrice propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Not for a single second. Xavier, you gave me a life I did not know was possible. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real partnership is. Every good thing in my life, every moment of joy, comes from the decision I made that day to jump. I would do it again 1,000 times." Xavier pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding night 15 years ago. "I love you, Beatrice Ingram. Thank you for taking a chance on a simple cowboy." "You were never simple," Beatrice said. "You are the most extraordinary man I have ever known." They returned to the ranch renewed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next together. The children grew older, each pursuing their own dreams with the support and encouragement of their parents. Lucas went off to veterinary school when he was 18, writing long letters home about his studies and the fascinating things he was learning. Alina took over more of the ranch management, proving herself to be exactly as capable as Xavier had always known she would be. James got a scholarship to study music in Denver, his talent finally getting the recognition it deserved. As Beatrice entered her 40s, she looked back on her life with deep satisfaction. She had started as a frightened woman jumping from a train, bruised and broken and certain she was going to die. Xavier had found her, had carried her home, had loved her back to wholeness. Together they had built a family, a home, a life full of purpose and joy. She still taught, though she had stepped down as principal to let a younger teacher take over that role. She loved her students, loved watching them grow and learn, loved being part of shaping the next generation. Xavier still ran the ranch with Alina's help, though he was starting to talk about gradually turning more responsibility over to her, so he and Beatrice could travel and enjoy their later years together. Their love had not dimmed with time. If anything, it had deepened, growing richer and more complex as they weathered life's challenges together. They still made love with passion, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other across a crowded room and felt that spark of connection that had been there from the beginning. On a warm summer evening when Beatrice was 45 and Xavier was 49, they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play. Lucas had married a sweet woman named Catherine and had given them 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl. Alina had married Peter, the ranch hand who had worked for Xavier for years, and they had just welcomed their first child. James had married another musician, and though they did not have children yet, they visited often and filled the house with music and laughter. "We did good," Xavier said, reaching over to take Beatrice's hand. "Look at what we built. Beatrice squeezed his hand, her wedding ring still shining on her finger after all these years. "We did very good. All those years ago, when I was lying broken on the side of that road, I never could have imagined this. That I would be so happy, so loved, so completely whole. I think about that day a lot," Xavier admitted. "What if I had taken a different route that day? What if I had been an hour earlier or later and missed you completely? You would have died out there, and I would never have known you existed." "But you did not take a different route," Beatrice said. "You found me exactly when I needed you to. I believe things happen for a reason, Xavier. I was meant to jump off that train. You were meant to find me. We were meant to build this life together." Xavier pulled her close, and they sat there as the sun set over the Colorado landscape, their grandchildren's laughter floating on the evening air, surrounded by the life they had created from pain and fear and desperate courage. Beatrice rested her head on Xavier's shoulder and felt completely at peace. She had jumped from a moving train to escape a nightmare, and a cowboy had found her bruised and carried her home. But home had not been a place. Home had been Xavier's arms, his love, his unwavering faith in her strength and worth. Home had been the family they had built, the community they had served, the love they had nurtured through decades of joy and sorrow. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Colorado sky, Beatrice said a silent prayer of gratitude for that September day in 1884, when her life had changed forever. She had been given a second chance, and she had made the most of it, building a life beyond her wildest dreams with a man who had shown her what love really meant. Their story had begun with violence and fear, but it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of love and courage, and the belief that broken things could be made whole again. And as Xavier kissed her temple and murmured that he loved her, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that every moment of pain had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of peace. The years continued to unfold gently after that summer evening, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows as life always does. When Beatrice was 52, her mother passed away peacefully in her sleep, and though the grief was sharp, Beatrice took comfort in knowing they had reconciled before the end. Her father lived another 5 years, spending much of that time at the ranch with Xavier and Beatrice, finally understanding the life his daughter had chosen and being proud of all she had accomplished. Lucas established a successful veterinary practice in Aurora, becoming the go-to doctor for all the ranchers in the area. He would often ride out to his parents' ranch to check on the animals, and those visits always turned into long conversations with Xavier about breeding lines and pasture management. 2 generations of ranchers learning from each other. Alina took over full management of the ranch when Xavier turned 60 and decided it was time to slow down. She ran it with the same dedication and skill her father had shown, expanding the horse breeding operation and earning a reputation throughout Colorado for quality stock. She and Peter built a house on the far end of the ranch property, close enough to help but far enough to have their own space, and raised their 3 children with the same values Xavier and Beatrice had instilled in them. James became a music professor at a college in Denver, teaching young musicians and composing his own pieces that were occasionally performed at concerts. He never moved back to Aurora, but he visited frequently, and his music filled the ranch house with beauty and life whenever he came home. Beatrice retired from teaching when she was 60, after nearly 30 years in Aurora's schools. The town threw her a retirement party that seemed to include half the population, former students coming from all over Colorado to thank her for the impact she had made on their lives. There was not a dry eye in the room when Sarah, the shy little girl from Beatrice's first year who was now a mother herself, stood up and talked about how Mrs. Ingram had seen her when no one else did, had believed in her when she did not believe in herself. In retirement, Beatrice finally had time to pursue hobbies she had always been too busy for. She learned to paint, creating simple watercolors of the ranch and the surrounding landscape. She read voraciously, working her way through entire literary movements she had never had time to explore. She volunteered at the church, organized a women's literary society, and spent countless hours with her grandchildren, reading to them and teaching them and passing on her love of learning. Xavier settled into retirement alongside her, though he never fully stopped working. He would still ride out to check on things, still helped Alina with the hardest tasks, still bred and trained horses because he loved it too much to give it up completely. But he also finally had time to just be with Beatrice, to take slow rides through their property, to sit on the porch and watch the sunset, to travel to places they had always talked about visiting. They took a trip to San Francisco when Beatrice was 62, their first time seeing the ocean. They stood on the beach holding hands, watching the waves crash against the shore, and marveled at how far they had come from that day when Xavier had found her broken and bleeding by the railroad tracks. They visited Lucas and his family in Chicago, where he had taken a teaching position at a veterinary college. They spent a month in Denver with James and attended one of his concerts, bursting with pride as they listened to him conduct an orchestra in one of his original compositions. But they always came home to the ranch, to the house Xavier had built and expanded over the years, to the land that had sustained them and the community that had become family. Aurora had changed dramatically in the decades since Beatrice first arrived. It had grown from a rough mining town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights and all the modern conveniences. But the core of it remained the same, people working hard and supporting each other through the challenges of life on the frontier. When Xavier was 73, he had a heart attack while helping Alina repair a fence. He survived it, but the doctor warned that his heart was weakened, that he needed to take things much easier if he wanted more time. Xavier was frustrated by his body's betrayal, by the limitations suddenly imposed on him, but Beatrice was there to remind him of what mattered. "We have had 41 years together," she told him as they lay in bed that night, her head on his chest listening to the slightly irregular rhythm of his heart. 41 years of love and laughter and building a life. That is more than most people get, Xavier, and we still have time. But you have to let yourself rest, let yourself slow down. I need you here with me as long as possible. Xavier kissed her forehead. I am not ready to leave you yet. We still have grandchildren to watch grow up, great-grandchildren to meet. I still want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Then take care of yourself, Beatrice said. Let Alina run the ranch completely. Let our children and grandchildren help us. Accept that we are getting older and that is all right. He did slow down after that, spending more time reading and talking and simply enjoying life's simple pleasures. They celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and a growing number of great-grandchildren. The house was full to bursting with love and laughter and multiple generations of Ingrams, all of them there because of a cowboy who had found a broken woman and carried her home. Lucas stood to make a toast that evening, raising his glass to his parents. Most of us in this room would not exist if not for the courage of two people. My mother, who was brave enough to jump off a moving train to save herself, and my father, who was kind enough to help a stranger and wise enough to fall in love with her. They taught us what real love looks like, what real partnership means. They showed us that family is not just blood, It is the people you choose to stand with through good times and bad. To Xavier and Beatrice, the foundation of everything good in our lives. The toast brought tears to Beatrice's eyes, but they were happy tears. She looked around at all these people, this beautiful family that had grown from the seeds planted that day in 1884, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her life had not been easy, but it had been so very good. Xavier's health declined slowly over the next few years. There were more heart episodes, times when his breathing became labored and Beatrice would lie awake listening to make sure he kept breathing. But there were also good days, days when he felt strong enough to take a short ride with her, days when they could sit on the porch and remember their life together. On a crisp October morning when Xavier was 76 and Beatrice was 72, he woke her early to watch the sunrise. They had done this countless times over their decades together, but something about this morning felt significant, weighted with meaning neither of them spoke aloud. "I have had a good life," Xavier said, as the sky lightened from black to gray to pink. "Better than I ever thought possible." "You gave me that, Beatrice. You made everything worth it." "We gave it to each other," Beatrice corrected, holding his hand tightly. "I was broken and you helped me heal. You were alone and I gave you family. We saved each other, Xavier." He kissed her, gentle and sweet, tasting of coffee and the peppermint he liked to chew. "I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you lying by those train tracks, so fierce and brave even in your pain. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered. "Always and forever." Xavier died peacefully 3 weeks later in his sleep with Beatrice beside him. She woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still in hers. The grief was crushing, a physical weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe, but even through the pain, she felt grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, grateful that he had not suffered, grateful that their last words to each other had been of love. The funeral was enormous, practically the whole town turning out to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the Aurora community for over 4 decades. Beatrice sat surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, drawing strength from the family Xavier had helped her build. She stayed on at the ranch for another 5 years, surrounded by Alina's family, still teaching the great-grandchildren to read and watching the sun set every evening from the porch where she and Xavier had spent so many hours. She thought about him constantly, talked to him sometimes as if he were still there, felt his presence in every corner of the house they had shared. When Beatrice was 77, on a warm summer night very much like the one when she and Xavier had sat watching their grandchildren play, she went to sleep and did not wake up. Alina found her the next morning, peaceful and still, a slight smile on her face as if she were dreaming of something wonderful. They buried her next to Xavier in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Aurora, their headstones side by side just as they had been side by side in life. The inscription on Beatrice's stone read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher. She jumped toward freedom and found love." Their children, now elderly themselves, stood at the graveside and told stories about their parents. About Xavier's patience and kindness, about Beatrice's strength and wisdom, about the love that had sustained them through decades of life's joys and sorrows. They talked about how their parents had shown them what true partnership looked like, how to weather life's storms together, how to build something lasting from the smallest acts of courage and compassion. Lucas, now 60 years old and white-haired like his father had been, ended the service with words he knew his mother would have appreciated. They were both broken when they found each other. She was physically injured, fleeing from violence. He was lonely, working himself to exhaustion on a ranch that barely survived. But together, they healed. Together, they built not just a family, but a legacy of love and service and courage that will continue for generations. They taught us that broken things can be made whole, that love is not a weakness but the greatest strength we have. That home is not a place but the person whose hand you hold through life's journey. As the family walked back down the hill to the ranch house where food and more memories waited, Alina looked back at her parents' graves, side by side under the wide Colorado sky. She thought about that day so many years ago, when her father had found her mother bruised and broken by the train tracks and had made the choice to help her. That single act of compassion had changed so many lives, had created ripples that spread out through time in ways neither Xavier nor Beatrice could have imagined when they made their vows all those years ago. The ranch continued for generations after that, passed down through Alina's line, each generation adding to it while honoring the foundation Xavier and Beatrice had built. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that courage and love can transform the darkest moments into something beautiful. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Colorado landscape in shades of orange and pink and purple, later generations of Ingrams would swear they could feel their presence there. The cowboy who had carried home a broken woman and the teacher who had jumped from a moving train toward freedom, forever together in the land they had loved and the family they had created. Their love story had started with an act of desperate courage and an unexpected kindness, and it had become something that transcended their individual lives, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, of seeing possibility in brokenness, of believing that every person deserves respect and dignity, and the chance to build a life of meaning. Xavier and Beatrice Ingram had lived fully and loved deeply, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that would endure long after the last traces of their physical presence had faded from the earth, carried forward in the hearts and lives of all those they had touched.